If you want a different outcome, the inputs can't look the same. That sounds obvious, but most people ignore it because the early trade-offs feel uncomfortable and unnecessary. In my early 20s, a mentor put it simply. The gap doesn't come from doing more. It comes from avoiding a small set of choices that everyone else treats as normal. At the time, I had no credentials and no financial cushion. Nothing about my starting point suggested leverage or advantage. What changed wasn't motivation or effort. I spent years studying people who were already ahead, how they worked, what they avoided, and where they quietly said no, while others rushed in. The same patterns kept showing up. Certain paths looked safe, respectable, even successful on the surface. Choosing them would have felt reasonable. It also would have locked in limits early. If you're new here, I'm Alex. Today we'll walk through 9 traps I've seen repeat again and again, traps that make people work harder, earn more, and still feel boxed in. By the end, you'll understand why avoiding a few common paths matters more than increasing income effort or hours when it comes to building real flexibility. And the first trap rarely announces itself as a mistake. It shows up as a reward, a lifestyle that feels like proof you're finally doing well. Trap 1. The lifestyle that looks like success. Bright cars, long weekends, restaurants where the bill arrives before you finish the sentence. From the outside, this looks like progress. In reality, it's often the first thing that quietly stalls it. Most of what gets labeled success early on is rented. Cars are financed. Trips are split across credit cards. Dinners feel affordable only because the cost is pushed into next month. Nothing breaks immediately, which is why this trap works. The damage shows up later when flexibility disappears. The numbers tell the story. A large share of households can't handle a few $100s in surprise expenses. Many worry about covering basic bills. And yet the visuals online suggest everyone is doing fine. That contrast pressures people into spending before their position can support it. The issue isn't enjoying money, it's timing. Buying depreciating signals too early forces you to keep earning just to maintain appearances. That turns income into a treadmill, not leverage. Wealth works in the opposite direction. Early on, cash is quiet. It goes into assets that don't post photos. Stocks, businesses, property. Things that compound without applause. Those assets create income that later pays for choices, not stress. Live like a king too soon, and you stay employed forever. Delay the display, and something interesting happens. Control shows up before the lifestyle does. Trap 2. Chasing paychecks instead of trajectory. A high-paying job feels like winning early. The paycheck is clean. Friends are impressed. Parents relax. But watch what happens a few years in. Raises slow. Responsibility rises. Options narrow. The number goes up, but the ceiling quietly drops lower. That's path A, money first. Growth later if it comes at all. Path B looks worse at the start. Lower pay, more friction, sometimes real stress around bills. But the trade-off is different. Skills compound. Responsibility expands. Your value grows faster than your salary ever could. Over time, the curve bends hard in your favor. This is how most durable wealth actually starts. Not by optimizing income, but by building capacity. Early roles matter less for what they pay and more for what they teach. Hands-on skills, problem solving, seeing how a business actually works. Even jobs that don't offer ownership can still pay in something more useful, experience you can reuse. Once skills are in place, equity becomes possible. You can build it yourself. You can earn it through contribution, or you can buy it later when you understand how to improve what you own. But equity only rewards people who know how value is created. Money feels safe. Skills and equity feel slow. That's why most people choose the first path, and why so few ever break past it. A moment of pressure. Before moving on, pause on this. Picture a normal month. Same job, same routine. Nothing dramatic happens except one thing. A bonus comes in, or overtime, or a short burst of higher income. Just enough to feel like breathing room. 3 reactions tend to follow. You let spending rise to meet it. A nicer place, a better car payment, more comfort built into the month. You push harder in the same lane. More hours, more responsibility. Everything still tied to that one role. Or you hold back. You leave the extra untouched and ask a different question. What breaks if this income slows? All 3 feel reasonable. Most people choose without noticing. The first 2 feel like progress because nothing changes until something does. The third feels slower, almost cautious, but it creates space to see the structure underneath. That pause matters because the next trap isn't about effort or ambition. It's about how exposed your setup really is when everything flows from one source and why that risk stays invisible during good months. Trap 3. The single income fragility. One paycheck can look solid right up until it isn't. Rent is covered. Bills are paid. There's even room for small upgrades. But everything depends on one stream continuing without interruption. That's not stability. That's balance on a narrow beam. Most jobs tie income directly to time. Miss hours earnings drop, lose the role, the number goes to zero. Even respected high-effort professions run into this wall. There's a ceiling on hours, energy, and tolerance for stress. Past a point, working harder doesn't raise income. It just raises exhaustion. This fragility stays hidden during calm periods. It only shows itself when something breaks. A company restructures. A health issue shows up. A market shifts. Suddenly, there's no buffer. No second engine running. That's why people with similar incomes can live very different financial lives. One has everything flowing through a single pipe. The other spreads risk across multiple channels. A business on the side. Equity that pays regardless of mood or schedule. Skills that can move across industries. Diversification isn't about chasing more work. It's about removing single points of failure. When income comes from more than one place, decisions slow down. Fear loses leverage. You stop optimizing every choice around job security. Relying on one source feels efficient. It's simple, clean, easy to explain. But systems built that way don't bend, they snap. Trap 4. Why solo effort hits a ceiling. Working alone feels efficient at first. No meetings, no coordination, no compromises. You move fast because every decision is yours. Then growth slows not because effort drops, but because output is capped. There's a hard limit to what one person can do in a day. Skills help, but leverage multiplies. That's why the biggest jumps rarely come from working harder. They come from working together. Look at major wins in tech and business. The story is never one person operating in isolation. It's groups that share knowledge, capital, and momentum. Early collaborators go on to build, invest in, and advise each other across multiple ventures. The network becomes the asset. This applies at smaller scales too. Many established businesses struggle with technology. Websites are outdated. Systems are manual. Processes rely on habits instead of tools. They know they can't do everything themselves, but they don't know where to start. That gap creates opportunity. Someone who understands modern tools can step in and add immediate value. Not by doing more work, but by improving how work gets done. Platforms that combine operations, finance, sales, and websites turn chaos into structure quickly. Trying to carry everything yourself feels responsible. It also keeps growth linear. Team systems and partnerships feel slower at first, then something shifts. Output detaches from effort, and progress stops depending on how tired you are. Trap 5. When too much advice freezes you. At some point, information stops helping and starts interfering. Early on, advice feels useful. You listen to friends, family, coworkers, videos, posts. Everyone has an opinion, and most of them sound reasonable on their own. The problem is volume. Too many inputs create too many paths. One voice says, take the safe job. Another says, start a business. Someone else says, travel. Another says, specialize. None of them are wrong. Together, they cancel each other out. This is how progress stalls without looking like failure. You stay busy researching, comparing, and preparing. Decisions feel heavier. Action slows. Over time, that hesitation becomes a pattern. The brain has limits. When options multiply, clarity drops. Psychologists call this cognitive overload. In real life, it shows up as analysis paralysis, not because you're lazy, but because every move feels like it might be the wrong one. The way out isn't more advice, it's fewer filters. Start with a rough destination, not a perfect plan. Then ignore inputs that don't move you closer to that direction. General opinions fade. Specific expertise matters. People who move forward aren't listening to everyone. They're listening to a few sources, deeply applying what they learn, then adjusting based on results. Focus sharpens when noise drops. Too much advice feels productive. In practice, it's often just motion without traction. Trap 6. Confidence before competence. Early confidence can feel like momentum. You learn a little, get a small win, and suddenly everything seems obvious. Investing feels easy. Business decisions feel intuitive. You start trusting your judgment more than the process. That's where this trap sets in. With limited knowledge, gaps stay invisible. You don't know what you're missing, so risk looks smaller than it is. This shows up constantly. New investors mistake a rising market for skill. Beginners in any field assume early success means mastery. Losses later feel confusing, even unfair. There's a predictable pattern here. Confidence spikes early, then collapses when complexity shows up. Many people quit at that point, convinced they're not cut out for it. Others double down, refusing feedback. Both outcomes stall progress. The people who move past this stage do something different. They slow down exactly when confidence is highest. They seek external signals, data, mentors, systems that disagree with them, not to undermine belief, but to calibrate it. Real competence feels quieter than early confidence. It's less certain, more precise. Decisions take longer. Questions get sharper. Progress looks slower, but mistakes shrink. The danger isn't lacking confidence. It's trusting it too early. The fastest way to level up isn't proving how much you know. It's discovering how much you don't and staying in the game long enough to close that gap. Trap 7, the ego tax. Ego rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly disguised as confidence, speed, and certainty. You skim instead of a study. You jump ahead instead of sitting with the details. You assume you already know where this is going. That assumption is expensive. People driven by ego focus on outcomes before they understand processes. They chase the big picture and miss the small mechanics that actually move things forward. In money, that looks like skipping fundamentals. In careers, it looks like avoiding feedback. In business, it looks like repeating the same mistake with more conviction. There's a pattern here. The more someone believes they've figured it out, the less they listen. Learning slows. Errors repeat. Growth flattens. Not because the opportunity disappeared, but because curiosity did. Knowledge doesn't work the way ego expects. What you know is always a fraction of what matters. The deeper you go, the more hidden layers appear. That gap isn't a weakness. It's the map. The most capable people tend to move slower than expected. They ask basic questions. They revisit assumptions. They stay teachable even when results improve. That humility compounds faster than raw confidence ever will. Ego wants to look smart. Wealth rewards people who stay precise. One keeps you impressive in conversations. The other keeps you solvent, adaptable, and quietly ahead, while others stall wondering why progress stopped. Trap 8, the blame reflex. Blame feels relieving in the moment. Something goes wrong, and the reason appears immediately. The market, the boss, the system, traffic, timing. Each explanation takes pressure off, which is why it sticks. The problem is what follows. Blame shifts attention outward. You start examining what others did instead of what you can change. Small excuses repeat. Missed deadlines become someone else's fault. Poor results turn into stories about bad luck or unfair conditions. Over time, this becomes a habit, not a reaction. There's an old saying that captures this progression. Blaming others keeps you stuck at the start. Blaming yourself moves you forward. Blaming no one means you've stopped needing excuses altogether. The distinction isn't moral, it's practical. Picture two tools. One magnifies everything around you, the other reflects back. The first makes problems louder. The second makes them solvable. You can't control policy markets or people. You can control preparation decisions and response time. People who build durable wealth tend to default to the mirror, not because they enjoy self-criticism, but because it gives them leverage. When responsibility stays, internal options multiply. Blame feels like awareness. Responsibility creates movement. One explains the past, the other changes what happens next. Trap 9. Comfort that quietly shrinks your life. Comfort doesn't feel dangerous. It feels earned. The routine works, bills are paid, expectations are met. Nothing is wrong, which is exactly why this trap lasts so long. The comfort zone has no visible exits. It closes in slowly, not with force, but with familiarity. The same role, the same schedule, the same thinking. Growth stops not because opportunity disappeared, but because risk stopped being part of the equation. Data backs this up. A large share of people never take meaningful professional risks. Even while worrying, they'll regret it later. The fear isn't failure, it's disruption. Comfort trains you to protect what you have instead of expanding what's possible. Progress works the opposite way. It comes from widening the circle, first through small steps, learning something unfamiliar, taking on a role you're not fully ready for, testing side projects that stretch identity before they stretch income. That's how most turning points happen. Not all at once, but through repeated discomfort. New skills create new options. Options create leverage. Leverage restores momentum. Staying comfortable feels responsible. In reality, it trades future flexibility for short-term ease. The space to grow never runs out. But it has to be claimed deliberately again and again before routine turns into a ceiling you never notice. Key takeaways. Most financial mistakes aren't dramatic. They're quiet patterns that feel reasonable in isolation, but compound in the wrong direction over time. Chasing visible success trades flexibility for approval. Optimizing pay instead of trajectory caps growth early. Depending on one income, one skill set, or one way of thinking creates fragility that only shows up under stress. Too much advice blurs action. Ego blocks learning. Blame removes leverage. Comfort slowly replaces momentum. None of these traps fail immediately. That's what makes them dangerous. They work until they don't. What separates durable wealth from constant pressure isn't intensity or intelligence. It's structure. Skills that compound. Assets that work without attention. Systems that reduce single points of failure. A mindset that stays curious, accountable, and willing to step into discomfort before it's forced. If this way of thinking resonates, stay with the framework. Each layer builds on the last, and the real shift happens when these patterns are seen together, not one at a time.